Hi, Jesse. So the first question is, Court Square in Long Island City has seen significant residential developments with thousands of new residents and large buildings continuing to be built. Although the city has tried to balance the unplanned residential development by promising Queens Public Library to reopen the closed library branch and budgeting money for the new elementary school in the neighborhood, there really hasn't been any real progress or updates from SCA or the Queens Public Library on the new school or reopening the library. As the council member that would represent the neighborhood, what steps could you do to prevent these scenarios from occurring in the future? And now that we're in the current situation, what steps can we do to ensure the city actually delivers its promise for the new school and to reopen the library?
Sure. Thanks for your question. Thanks for organizing this, Frank. I'm happy to chat with you and answer all questions about Court Square. I live not far from Court Square myself. I live in sort of the Dutch Kills section of the neighborhood. So I am walking through Court Square pretty frequently. My daughter goes to daycare on that side of Queens Plaza. So what you might call Court Square, or you might still call Dutch Kills, depending on your perceptions of neighborhood boundaries. So I'm, very much a native and a local, and I've lived around here for almost 20 years. And in the almost 20 years I've lived here, I have seen the neighborhood change enormously. I remember when the only tall buildings when I moved here were the Citibank building and the first two buildings on the waterfront, the sort of City Lights development. And that was it. Those are the only sort of tall things. And now, of course, we have like a mini city of our own in LIC, Court Square, Queens Plaza, and it's extending up through where I live in Dutch Kills and out some towards Sunnyside. So it is a lot of change. And I do think that the city of New York as a public institution does a poor job of managing growth and making sure that we have services that track with that growth. You brought up the library and the schools. I think this also pertains to transportation infrastructure. I think we've needed a significant investment in additional transportation capacity. The 7 train is overcrowded. We need to figure out how to get more people onto express buses, which pass through our neighborhood but don't even stop in our neighborhood, and to get more people on other sort of high capacity transit. I've called for new busways connecting Queens and Brooklyn to have better north-south transit. So I think that in general, as the city and in neighborhoods like Court Square grow, we need to have more public sector infrastructure investment to accompany that growth. And so I absolutely think that the city needs to open the new school and reopen the library. And I think they're overdue. And I think it's largely because of the chronic mismanagement of city agencies like Department of School Construction and DDC, Department of Design and Construction. The city is always just years behind on their promises to build out good things. That's not a problem that any one council member can easily solve. I think we should acknowledge that our incumbent council member, Jimmy Van Bramer, has been chair of the committee that oversees libraries, and yet here we are, right? And certainly Jimmy cares about this. And so it's not enough to just care, right? One thing that I have going for me is that I'm one of just a couple of candidates that actually have experience dealing with the city bureaucracy. For the last 4 years up until last summer, I was the director of policy for the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, which meant that I represented all the nonprofits in the city that do any sort of job training or workforce development, help people get jobs. And my role was to interact with the city agencies like the Department of Youth and Community Development, like Small Business Services, like what's now the Department of Social Services, to make sure that they were doing a better job working with their nonprofit partners. And I saw the dysfunction up to the highest levels of city agencies. So one thing I would want to do as a council member is to do better oversight of our city agencies, because it is the agency dysfunction that leads to these delays, to be willing to take on entrenched long-term public officials who aren't really getting the job done, and to push them harder to be more creative, work outside the box, don't get trapped in the sort of the standard BS red tape that slows down so much in city government. And that's the only way we're going to get things like this open faster. It's not a question of desire. It's not a question of the city not wanting us to have that school or not wanting the library to be open. It's a matter of basically incompetence. And the de Blasio administration could probably have incompetence as their overall motto. It's one of the reasons why I just think that that administration, good riddance, and everyone associated with it, please leave city government. But hopefully the next administration, whoever it is, will be better. And those of us in the city council will have a real responsibility to push them to be a lot better and to move a lot faster on keeping promises like the school and the library, and ones that I've talked about as well, like transportation infrastructure in the neighborhood as well.
Oh, perfect. No, thank you so much. The second question is, District 26 is made up of diverse neighborhoods that are pretty segregated today. Today families in one neighborhood could live, eat, work, send their kids to different schools than other families in the district. Since these communities don't often intersect, you end up with perspectives with one neighborhood describing Long Island City as a ghost town with ghost towers. And then the other perspective is, well, Long Island City is so overcrowded, there's a lack of school seats and transportation and public green space. So as the elected official representing the overall district, how do you reconcile these perspectives and different communities to ensure better connectivity, but also just better overall representation for the district?
Right. That's a great question. And I've done a lot of these interviews, and I don't think enough people talk about the differences within our district, because it really is a district that encompasses the stark segregation and income inequalities that are played out across the city of New York, but a lot of those fault lines run right through District 26. And it's one of the reasons why on a lot of sort of big picture questions that we get asked, I try to actually separate my question and recognize that I think the answers to some of these questions should be different, whether you're talking about something that's going on in a relatively high income and majority white part of the district, or a relatively working class and majority people of color part of the district. I think, for example, questions around development should be treated through a not race blind, but an actually anti-racist lens. I am not going to be a council member who has one position on new development. I'm going to be a council member who has a position that takes into account what the existing community is. And so a proposed building in Woodside would get a very different reaction to me from a proposed building, in Hunters Point South, right? Because they're very different neighborhoods in their current status quo, and they have different needs. And I think that we actually need more affordable housing in Long Island City, Court Square, Hunters Point, all of that part of the district. And I want to aggressively move to promote more affordable housing in those areas. And then places like Woodside, we need to make sure that we are protecting the housing stock that already exists there and not gentrifying that neighborhood and not forcing people out of Woodside or parts of Sunnyside. So I think that's a very different sort of mentality. And I think it has to take into account the very different parts of the neighborhood that we have. And I should note one other really important subset is that, I live in the sort of Dutch Kills, Ravenswood section of the neighborhood. I actually live basically across the street from the Ravenswood NYCHA development. And, our district has about 15% or thereabouts of the population of our district lives in one of the 3 NYCHA developments in the district. And of course, their experience of the neighborhood is even more different from people who live outside of NYCHA. NYCHA is not in a state of great repair. The NYCHA developments in our district are frankly better than some of the NYCHA developments in other parts of New York City in terms of their state of repair, and into other quality of life conditions, but they still have a lot of serious needs. And so I think that's one of the things that, a council member who doesn't live in NYCHA, and none of the 15 candidates right now, I think currently live in NYCHA, some have lived there in their lives, needs to remember that is a significant part of our neighborhood that we need to take into account. We need to actually aggressively work to improve the quality of life there. And as somebody who lives across the street, I know I share my playground with the folks who live in NYCHA. I share the subway stop. I share the grocery store. And so I have a shared community with my neighbors in NYCHA, and I want to try to make sure that I am lifting up their needs as a council member. But it is a real challenge for any council member who gets elected to make sure that we're balancing all of these different communities. And I think that the short answer, I know I've gone on long here, the short answer is there isn't one answer, right? You can't have one District 26 wide response to education or transportation or development. You need to actually have a nuanced, anti-racist, wide, open-eyed view towards how is this going to affect the particular community that I'm talking about? What are the real transportation or housing or education needs for these blocks or these blocks? Because they're not going to be the same 5 or 10 blocks apart. And anybody who just has one knee-jerk reaction to any of those things is going to get it wrong, half the time.
No, thanks, Jesse. So just two more questions. The third question is, when Court Square was first envisioned, it was supposed to be this commercial area, an extension of Midtown East. However, the developments end up being a lot of large residential high-rise, which we know today. Today, Court Square is being positioned as a mixed-use neighborhood with some commercial development happening, like the Jacks, a very large office building, and the new bio life science building by the park. What are your perspectives on diversifying the building mixes for commercial use within Court Square specifically, but then if applicable, with what government tools, policies, or incentives otherwise?
Great question. Yeah, no, I agree. I like mixed use neighborhoods as the model to begin with, citywide. And the more that we can have more truly mixed use, not just theoretically mixed use, but truly mixed use neighborhoods, the better, because it puts less of a strain on parts of our infrastructure, including principally our transportation infrastructure. The more people that can walk to work or bike to work because they live in a neighborhood that has places to work and places to live, the better for the city as a whole. A model of New York City where everybody works in Manhattan and everybody commutes in from other boroughs is actually a failed model, and one that's going to put too much strain on our infrastructure. And so I think to some degree I am chagrined by the not just the scale of development, but the fact that a lot of the development that has happened in Long Island City and Court Square over the time I've lived here has been heavily residential. I would like to see more commercial development going forward in the mix. And there's a couple of ways I think that we could do that using city policy. One is obviously to make use of some of our city-owned land, to make sure that as we are developing city-owned land, and I think we should do that with public interest in mind, and whenever possible, direct public development of publicly owned land through RFPs put out by the city, as opposed to just letting, selling the land to a private developer. But we should develop that land in a mixed-use manner with an eye towards making this neighborhood of the city somewhat more commercial than it is right now, because I do think there has been an imbalance towards the residential over the last decade or two. The other thing that we can do, and one of the proposals I put out in my campaign that I think is unique to what I've put out compared to the other candidates, is that I'm very much running as a Green New Deal candidate. I'm very focused on making sure that we reduce our climate footprint, but also that we build a more environmentally just city, because all too often the pressures of the environmental pollution and generally of degradation that we have in our city right now fall more substantially on low-income communities of color. And in our neighborhood, and it's just a little bit outside of Court Square, one of the sort of iconic problems we have is the Ravenswood Generating Station, which is over on Vernon Boulevard, just north of the Queensboro Bridge. That is, by megawatt capacity, the largest single power plant in New York City. It is, of course, a fossil fuel burning power plant. It burned coal for most of its life. It burns gas now. I think that we should redevelop fossil fuel power plants. We should shut down the power plants that we have that are fossil fuel generated power plants within the 5 boroughs of the city of New York, and use that land for true mixed use development. And that's one of the places where I think that we actually can have sort of a win-win on development, rather than trying to redevelop residential neighborhoods and try to get bigger buildings in places where people are used to having small scale buildings, which is always going to make people uncomfortable. I would rather see private development happen on the sites of current fossil fuel infrastructure. There are a bunch of power plants, and even you get smaller scale down to gas stations, that I think could be redeveloped into housing, businesses, even light industrial spaces, and doing a new citywide rezoning that would allow fossil fuel infrastructure to be torn down and replaced by new, greener housing and businesses is a part of how we roll out a Green New Deal citywide. And it's one of the ways that we can actually tap into the sort of private real estate market in a positive way, as opposed to just waiting for private developers to cobble together the lots that they want to develop on. We should be proactive and say, no, we know where we want you to develop. We want you to develop over there where there's a big, ugly fossil fuel power plant, tear that down and build housing or businesses instead. So citywide rezoning that would tackle fossil fuel infrastructure and allow for more mixed use development in its place will be one of the ways that we could open the door to more of that in our larger community. And in particular, I want to focus on that power plant, which is a huge site in our neighborhood. It's about 10 square blocks of the equivalent of about 10 square blocks of land on Vernon Boulevard and the waterfront. Has enormous potential if it weren't a big ugly power plant.
Oh, definitely. So just the very last question, and I know this question was asked to you in March. The question is, who would be your ranked choice vote for number two in the city council election?
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
in March you had listed a couple candidates that you like. I don't know if you've made any decisions yet. Maybe who your number two would be. The bonus question would really be who would be your ranked choice vote for the next mayor of New York City?
I actually think I could answer more on mayor. So I think my feeling on the council race is similar to where it was then. There's a few people that in different ways I really like and respect that are all my fellow candidates. I think there's a couple of people that are like me, interested in green transportation, whether it's buses or bikes. I think a couple of folks that are really good on those issues. Well, Mike is out of the race now, but Julie Wan is really good on particularly bike infrastructure. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody else who's really in a good place on that. And then, there's people, I mentioned that I'm one of just a couple of candidates that actually has good experience around City Hall and understanding city bureaucracy. Amit Baga is somebody who also has that experience. I think Amit and I are the two most experienced candidates. And then, I generally am a multi-issue progressive. I am somebody who is very interested in deconstructing the NYPD, which I think is a irrevocably structurally racist institution that we cannot reform. We need to deconstruct it, break it apart, and replace it with better community safety infrastructure. And I think there's only a couple of other candidates that share that sort of serious view of the NYPD needing to go. Jonathan Bailey, I know, is one of them. So those are all people that I think that I share some political connections to or DNA with, and so I think they probably are the sort of people that would end up on my ballot in one capacity or another. But I don't know exactly who will be number two or number three or whatever. For mayor, I have endorsed Diane Morales as my number one choice for mayor. And I think that she's the one who I share the most with in terms of politics and view of what needs to happen with the city, certainly with regard to issues like the Green New Deal and issues like policing, sort of two of my core issues. I think Diane Morales and I are in line. The other thing that I like about her is that she's not a part of the existing city government. I really do think that the de Blasio administration especially, but the city government as a whole, has really let New Yorkers down over the last decade or so. I think that we have had the opportunity to be, at the cutting edge of progressive policy and making our city, sort of the gold standard for how we build a more equitable and more sustainable society. And we've frankly pretty much dropped the ball. We've seen other cities across the country be more innovative in their policy and get out ahead of us on basically everything. And I think that that's embarrassing as a New Yorker, right? And so I really think we need to clean house at City Hall. I don't think it's a good idea to have the next mayor be somebody that, has been a veteran of City Hall, because they're going to have inside of them a lot of the sort of conventional wisdom that is baked in to the current City Hall. And that conventional wisdom is often reasons why we can't do X or we can't do Y. And I think we need somebody that is not beholden to we can't do this and we can't do that, but somebody who actually wants to try, be innovative, be creative, and be transformational. So that's also true of Diane Morales, in addition to her sort of progressive politics, that she's an outsider as well. And so that's why she's my number one choice for mayor.
Great. Thank you so much, Jesse.